All right, this is day 2 of lesson 2.3. So in the resource that we use to teach Algebra 2, here we lump what we're going to talk about today, which is Extrema, right, which is plural for extreme. We lump that with end behavior, right, which we talked about in the last couple of videos. I talked about end behavior and kind of how to write that, and that's what's happening at the end of the function. And what Extrema is going to talk about is kind of the opposite. It's more kind of what's happening in the middle of the function, right? And so what you'll find is most of the examples we're looking at with Extrema are happening with nonlinear functions, because a linear function doesn't really change or anything like that. We'll talk about that in a second, right? And once you see it, you'll start, again, it will be one of those things where it's probably easier for you to just kind of talk about it using common terms than it is to use, the mathematical terms. But the nice thing about this lesson is we're not really using any super fancy terms in this one. We're not using infinity signs and arrows and all of that. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, just words, and we like words. All right, so we're going to talk about what Extrema are. We're going to basically, in this video, we're going to do a vocab review, and then if the video is not going too long, we'll talk about what it looks like on a graph, and then probably by that time, I'm guessing we're going to have to switch and stop the video and then come back and then talk about tables. But we'll see how it goes. All right, maybe I'll stop yapping here and we'll get moving. All right, so extrema of graph. All right, so extrema of graph is basically anywhere on the graph that you see where it changes directions, right? And by directions, we're talking about slope, right? So if you have a graph that from left to right, it looks like it's going in one direction, and then it's continuing to go from left to right, but it changes directions, then that is going to give you the spot where it switches, right, is going to give you an extreme point. And by an extreme point, we mean it's relative to the graph, right? Because obviously, the highest and lowest points of the graph, generally speaking, are going to be what the end behavior is, right? One way or the other. But we're talking about what's kind of happening on the way there. Okay? So a relative minimum is a point on the graph with if it's minimum, think with a lower y coordinate. So y is always corresponding to your height, right? Because if you think of your height, you're thinking of up and down, right? And up and down is vertical, and that is good old y, covers the vertical axis, right? X is this way, right? That was end behavior. Y is more dealing with your extrema, talk about your height. So this right here is an example of a relative minimum. And the reason you can see that, hopefully, is that as it's coming this way, right, it's going down. Your slope is down, right? It's coming, it's going down, and then it hits B, right? And then once it hits B, this thing starts going up, right? And then it hits A, right? And then it decides it's going to go down again, right? So I think if we look at it kind of in layman's terms, right, and what's sort of happening, you can see that the slope changes. And so those changing points are going to be our minimum and our minima and our maxima, right? And minima is plural of minimum, and maxima is plural of maximum, right? It's one of those Latin things. All right, so our maximum is going to be, like we already talked about it, like point A, and you can see that that is higher than any of the points like next to it, right? B is lower than any of the points kind of next to it right here until it makes the next change, right? So obviously there's a point over here that's lower than B, but we're just talking about just in this little area, this is your relative minimum, this is your relative maximum. So we're going to write the word higher in here, right? Point on a graph with a higher y-coordinate or greater y-coordinate than any other nearby point. And the turning point is where that curve completely changes direction from either down to up or up to down. And that gives you your maxima or your minima, all right? And that's what this whole lesson is about, is how do we identify that. All right, so let's get started. Let's look at this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our yellow thing here and we're going to find our turning points. So here's a turning point right here, right? It goes from down, starts going up. Here's another turning point right here, and it's going up, leading into it, and then going past it. And we're always, when we're looking at these, I think it's just easiest to always go left to right. You know, just the direction you read in, right? And then we're going down, 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 down. We hit here, and then lo and behold, we start going up again. Okay? So what we're going to talk about is where these functions have these, right? So we would go right here. I'm going to use black. And we would have this point right here, and this would be a relative minimum, right? Relative minimum. This point right here is a relative maximum. And then we have another relative minimum. Remember, relative means related to the area it's in, right? And these can change very quickly, right? Like these two are very close to each other, right? So, you know, in this one, and you can have several relative minima and several relative maxima, right, in the same graph, okay? This one right here, let's look. Well, it looks like this is kind of where it starts, so we're not going to really call that. I mean, we could basically say that, well, because this is the lowest point right here, we could say, well, that's a relative minimum right here, right? And then right here, it's kind of a turning point. But the thing is, it's going up here, and then it goes zero, right? It goes to zero. And so I guess you could say that it's, you know, it's a relative maximum, right? That's a relative maximum because it doesn't get any higher, right? Right here, it's because it stays the same, right? It's not going down, but it's not going up either. And then when we hit this point, that's another turning point, and this thing starts going up again. So at that point, you have a relative minimum, right? You get up to here, right? And then this thing starts going down again. So you have a relative max. Here's going to be a relative minimum, right? And you hopefully getting the idea. Here's a max. Here's a minimum. And then because this thing stops, you would say it has a max. Now, if it kept going on, obviously, if it kept doing this, then this wouldn't be a max because related, there's no turning point. There has to be a turning point. But we'll call the stop, if it stops, we'll just basically say, well, that's like a starting or ending point right there, right? But this, so hopefully this is kind of making sense from a graphical standpoint, right? You're just looking for where does the slope change either from positive to negative or from negative to positive, right? So that's what you're looking for. Okay, number 5. All right, now we are looking at what's going on. So from X, this is basically going from left to right. All right, it's going as X is negative, and then it slowly gets bigger and bigger. So let's just kind of look at what's happening with Y. Well, from 9 to 0, it's going down, right? So it's going down. Then from 0 to -1, it's also going down. But from -1 to 0, it's going up. So somewhere here, right? Because it's going from down to up, right? That means you have down to up, right? So that would be somewhere in there, you would have a relative minimum, right? And then it's continuing to go up here, right? Or wait, no, my bad. I missed the negative there, right? And then, so it went up, and now it's going from 0 to -3, so it's going back down again, right? So we're going to say that in there, we've got a relative maximum, right? And then it goes down -3, goes down to -16, goes down to -45. So there's no other turning points in there. So we've got it going down, down, and then here it's going up, so we've got a relative minimum. So if we kind of sketch this, we would say it's going down, it goes up, and then it goes down again, and it does something like this, right? So that's more or less what the graph looks like, okay? This one, right, just kind of look at what's happening. So this is left or right, left or right. We're starting at 1, the cost is 60 cents. And it keeps going up, right, until somewhere here, right? So if it's going up and then it starts going down, that means we have a maximum, right? It's peaked. It's hit its point. But then from here to here again, right, it goes up, right? So somewhere in there we have a minimum, right, a relative minimum. I'm not writing relative. Hopefully that's okay with you. And then it starts going down, down, down to this point, right? And then it sort of looks like it levels off, right? So we've got a minimum right here, and then it hits this. So if it's going down again, right, at some time, then there's a max, right? So it's going, right, maximum, goes down, hits a minimum, and then goes back up to $1, hits a maximum. And then it's going down, down, down until you get 70, right? And then it looks like it stops here, right? So I don't know what we'd call that, but that would be a relative maximum or minimum coming. But we're going to kind of leave that ambiguous here, right? And then so it continues to go down, right? And then once we hit 40 right in here, it goes up again, which means that we have a relative minimum in there, and then it starts going up again. Okay, so this is sort of what we're looking at, right? There's a lot going on here, but it's just a matter of if you look at a graphical representation, it's going to go up, and it's going to go down, right, to 90, goes up to $1 again, all right, and then it's going down to 70, kind of levels off a little, goes down to 40, and then it starts to go up again. So those turning points, right, are where your extrema are, and that's how you notate them. Okay, so I've kept this all in one video. It's long, but hopefully it will make sense to you, and good luck with everything.